Well, all right. So we are back with Pythagorean theorem. If you haven't quite mastered Pythagorean theorem yet and how to use it, I'm going to go through the concept real quick and then go through two examples so you can use this video to help you with the practice. And using Pythagorean theorem is going to be something that's going to come up multiple times in high school. All right, so let's look at the lesson. All right, so our learning objective today is we will calculate side lengths of right triangles with Pythagorean theorem. So our skill is we're going to calculate the side lengths of right triangles. So that's the skill. The concept is the idea of Pythagorean theorem. So calculating a side length of a right triangle is a skill. It's pretty straightforward. I'll show you the steps. And then the concept of Pythagorean theorem also sounds kind of complicated, but it's actually rather a simple idea once you've seen it and once you start to really understand the idea of what it's telling you. So the definition of Pythagorean theorem is this. Pythagorean theorem states the sum of the squares of the shorter sides of a right triangle. All right, let's slow down right there. The sum of the squares. All right, the word sum here is referring to adding things. So if I were to add together the squares of the shorter sides, like what does that mean? Well, it's literally what it says. Make a square. Now, not really, that's not the skill, but think about a side length and then making a square off of that. Let me show you what I mean. Look at this triangle here in my example. I have A, B, C. I have a triangle with three sides. Well, if I make a square off the two shorter sides, this is what it would look like. Side A, side B now has squares, and then the relationship between those squares, the sum of the squares, A squared, a literal square, B squared, another square, is actually going to be equal to the square of the longest side. So this is altogether what I'm talking about. Pythagorean theorem simply says, if you have a right triangle and you were to make a square, the area of square A plus the area of square B is going to be equal to the area of square C. Now, that's kind of an odd idea, and that's why this is called a theorem. Now, theorems in math mean that we have to prove them in order to believe them. This lesson is not about proving it. It's just going through this idea. All right triangles are related through this relationship. The square, an actual square, A squared, plus B, and you make a square, is equal to C squared. Now, nobody actually wants to draw these squares when we're doing problems, so the skill is all about using this equation you see over here. And you can see when I say A squared, I'm actually talking about squaring the numbers, which is the same thing as taking the area of that square. Now, Pythagorean theorem only works on right triangles. It only works on right triangles. And a right triangle, here you can see right triangle. A right triangle is any triangle that has a 90-degree angle or a square corner. So here, right simply means a 90-degree angle. Well, let's look at the skill now. How are we going to be using Pythagorean theorem in this lesson? Well, sorry, in any lesson. Read the problem and identify, read the problem for important information and directions. It simply says, calculate the length of x. So I need to find out how long is this length right here. Okay, so step one, step two now, identify the right angle. This is crucial. This is where you always need to begin. Find the right angle. Here is the right angle, that's the square corner. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to now draw a line from that square corner to the opposite side of this triangle. And what that shows me is the side across from the right angle is always the longest side. And the longest side, we are always going to label with side C for the hypotenuse. Now, let me say that word again, hypotenuse. Hypotenuse is the longest side of a right triangle. If I were to go back a slide, you can see here that the hypotenuse, let me get my pen again, the hypotenuse right here is simply the name we give for the long side of a right triangle. We call the other sides legs. Now, once I have identified the hypotenuse, then I'm going to label the legs. And the legs are the sides next to the right angle. They do not matter which one you choose for A and B. It does not matter because addition doesn't matter the order. So I'm going to go ahead and say that side length of 5 is going to be A, B is going to be 12, and C is the side I don't know. Again, C is the hypotenuse. Always C is the hypotenuse. Well, now that I've labeled the three sides of this triangle with A, B is the legs, C is the longest side of the hypotenuse, it is now time to use Pythagorean theorem. And I'm going to use my, actually, let me color code this a little bit. I've got A is 5, B will be in red 12, and C is the side I am looking for. All right, so let's start by looking at how to begin. Always start by writing Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. If you don't start by writing it, you're going to make mistakes. Write it out. Next step, after I've written it out, now I'm going to substitute the numbers I'm given for the correct variables. So I'm going to take A for 5 and put 5 squared. B is 12, so I'm going to put 12 squared, and then leave C the same. So again, this 5 I substituted for A, and this 12 I substituted for B. Well, now that I have the numbers in the equation, this step, these next steps, is just about following the rules for solving an equation. Look, I have an equation. 5 squared plus 12 squared equals C squared, a variable. Let's solve for C. Let's find out what it equals. All right, so I'm going to begin by squaring the numbers. Remember, a squared sign means multiply times itself. So I'm left with 25 plus 144 equals C squared. Well, let's simplify that side and add them together. That's where I get this 169 equals C squared. I simply just combined the two sides on that same side of the equation. Now, this step is a little weird if you don't really fully understand how do we isolate the variable if it has a squared sign. Well, luckily we have a tool we use, and that's called the square root sign. So I'm now going to use the square root symbol to cancel out the squared sign. Whatever I do to one side of my equation, I have to do to the other. So this square root symbol, the whole reason to use it is to cancel out those two things right there, cancel out the squared sign. But I have to do it to the other side. Now let's remember what the square root symbol tells us to do. It asks us to find out what number times itself is that number under the square root. In this case, 169, I happen to know, is 13. If you didn't know that, you can always use your calculator on this step. Just type in 169 and hit the square root function, and you will find out that C is equal to 13. So for this problem, it said, calculate the length for x. The length for x is going to be 13. So let's go ahead and put this 13 and put it over here.